Hello, I'm Jazmine Moore, a current PhD student studying neuroscience, also an ex-D2 cross-country and track and field athlete, but today I'm going to be talking about one of my other favorite passions, which is reading. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite and I guess my least favorite books from 2021. So let's get into it. So I'm going to just be glancing down at my Notion setup that I have for all the books that I read. I like to do like mini book reviews for the books that I read, just so if ever in the future I need to go back, I can just easily search up the book, look at my thoughts and first impressions and quotes that I liked and all that in one place. This video is not sponsored, but I think I started using Notion as a recommendation from Ali Abdal, who uses Notion for various things, and I found it to be very helpful for keeping track of the books I read. So I have my books over here, even though they're kind of out of frame, and I'm just going to start from the top to the bottom. So the first book that I read was A Promised Land by Barack Obama earlier this year. And I'll just keep all these kind of short because I don't want to get too in detailed. I do like to annotate as I read, and as I mentioned, I do have a Notion where I input all of my thoughts and feelings about books. I love Obama, but I do have to say it was kind of dry in the middle. Maybe it's because I'm not that into politics, and he does talk heavily about the politics of politics, but it picks up at the end, and it was pretty good in the beginning. And overall, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The second book that I read this year was The Buying Brain by Dr. A.K. Pradip. And I didn't like this book. It's possible that it's just not for me, but it just didn't really do anything for me, and I didn't learn anything new that I didn't already know. So the third book that I read this year was Our Mathematical Universe by Max Tegmark, and I've actually read one of his other books, Life 3.0, that I really enjoyed, and I also really enjoyed this book. It does have some heavy technical math in here that kind of just flew over my head, but I liked his writing style. He's pretty funny, and I learned a lot of interesting things in here. But a caveat to that, I do have a friend who's doing his PhD in a pure math program. And from his perspective, he actually didn't like the book and thought it was okay at best. So it was interesting talking to someone who's actually in math and I guess researching math, their opinion on this book, because Max Tegmark is a mathematician and an astrophysicist. That might be wrong, but something like that. The next book that I read was The Uninhabitable Earth, and this is by David Wallace Wells. This was an amazing book. It's very insightful. There's a ton of references and research regarding, and this is about climate change, regarding climate change and the predictions for the future. With that being said, though, it is almost, I guess it depends on who you are and how you look at life. It is kind of depressing when you look at all the facts and information and research that's given to us and that we know of as regarding like what climate change is going to do to our planet in the future. So, and he does touch on that in this book. I won't say too much on this. If you guys want actual videos on these books, then I'd be happy to do that. But that was a good book, very informative, and I suggest that everybody read that book. So the next book that I read was The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, butchering again. I really enjoyed this book. I'm trying to get up on my money. I think everybody is, considering how the 2020s have been going thus far. But this was a really good read. It really makes you question how you think about money, how you were raised to think about money. And I think it's a good book if you're looking into trying to build wealth. The next book I read that I really, really enjoyed was Endurance by Scott Kelly, an astronaut. He was also a part of the Twin Studies by NASA. And this was just a really good book. It's a lot of insight on being in space, what that entails, his personal struggles up in space, and then being up in space and having, you know, obviously a life back here on Earth. And it was just a really good read. If you're into space and astronauts or NASA, I suggest that you read that book. So the next book that I read this year was Gabrielle Unions, We're Going to Need More Wine. I have mixed feelings about this book, and I think I'll just leave it at that. But I do want to read the next book that she has out. I can't remember what it's called. I probably will read it. I really don't have a reason why I'd read it if I didn't really care for it, or, you know. I really don't know how I feel about this book. I'm going to read the next one, though. That's all I'm going to say. Next, actually, and I talk about this in another video. I don't know if it's going to come out before or after this one, though. The 4-Hour Workweek. I actually started this book, and then I stopped reading it. So I don't know. Everyone on YouTube highly recommends this book. They say it's changed their lives and this and that, and I started reading and it just wasn't doing anything for me, so I stopped. So I can't really give a review on it. I am thinking about picking it up back again in 2022 and reading it and then forming an opinion on it, but right now I just couldn't do it. The next book I read this year was A Queer History in the United States, and this was by Michael Bronski. I picked up this book because essentially I would like to call myself an ally to the LGBTQ plus community. And for me, what that looks like is educating myself on the history, on the problems, on the politics of that, and just doing my due diligence so I know what's going on and I'm educated about the things happening to and in this community. And that's just something that I personally wanted to do. I guess I kind of like history books, but not like traditional textbooks. I like learning about like specific topics. Like this was really eye-opening. He draws a lot of parallels to the queer history of the United States, to slavery and overall Black oppression in the United States. So that was actually really interesting, and I liked how this book was written. Next, another book that I read, I don't know, oh, it's over here. Another book I read this year was The Next 500 Years, Engineering Life to Reach New Worlds by Christopher E. Mason. I like this book. Personally, I think it's very optimistic, and then I'm also in a weird spot when we're projecting this far into the future, knowing what I think I know currently about climate change. So I guess it's kind of hard for me to just project that far, knowing that we have more immediate problems that we need to address before we can address all the problems that need to be solved with long-term space flight and space travel. It was a pretty good book. I'd recommend. And the last book, oh no, it's actually not the last book, I lied. The next book that I read in 2021 is Flamin Hot by Mr. Richard. He was, you might have heard of his story, the janitor to VP and basically executive position in the Frito-Lay company, which is now the Pepsi something, whatever. Anyway, really good book. I read this book in I think 2 days. It's also, you know, it's not that dense, not that thick. But I really enjoyed this book, and it kind of reminded me that I need to start reading from more authors of not even minority, but just different backgrounds, because a lot of the stuff that he talks about in this book, even though I've never worked on an assembly line, I'm obviously, we don't come from the same heritage, but a lot of the stuff that he talks about in this book, I could heavily relate to, just coming, just being an African-American woman in the United States and some of the struggles I've had to personally deal with and that I see on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of just refreshing to like have all that acknowledged. So, okay, my phone's dying. It was just refreshing to have all that acknowledged and kind of validated in someone else's experience who ended up, you know, becoming successful nonetheless. So this is a really good book, and I think they're gonna make it a movie. I think it's post-production, and if and when it comes out, I will be watching it. And the last book I read in 2021, I guess thus far, because I have one more, but I'm not done with it, is Marriage for White People, ? And this is by Ralph Richard Banks. And this was just very educational. I can actually probably make a whole video, actually on most of these books, on this book too, just because as an African American woman, we're told, you know, a lot of the time that it's our fault for, I'm not even going to get into it. I highly recommend this book if you're an African American woman. It talks about the statistics of marriage in the United States, of Black relationships, and then it also looks at interracial patterns. And this is very insightful, and I highly recommend that you read this book if you are a Black woman living in the United States of America. And the last book that I'm reading in 2021 is Will by Will Smith, and I think it is in part written by Mark Manson. I just started this book. I am only 8 chapters in. That's 19 pages of this book. I may finish this before the year ends, or it may end up being in a 2022 video, so I can't necessarily give my opinion right now, but so far I'm really enjoying the book, and I admire and appreciate all the work Will Smith has put in over the years. So that has been a year review of the books I have read in 2021. If you've read any of these books, I would like to know what you thought about them in the comments. And if you care and you enjoyed the video, go ahead and subscribe and like, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.